I doing all? Want to make a quick video. I've had a few people contact me through social media, through my website, through Facebook. Sometimes I bump into them downtown, and they always say to me, what settings do you use on your camera when you take a picture? And it's pretty simple, really. Obviously, when you first get your camera, you start off shooting in basic mode of the green little square box, and then you'll go on to P mode, which is program mode, and then you'll shoot in aperture. This is completely about a landscape though, because a lot of my shutter speeds are really slow, like a second or longer. So things you need to take into consideration with landscape photography is you always need a tripod. Pretty much 99.9% of every picture on my website, my camera's been stood on a tripod. Obviously I line the shot up looking through the eyepiece, but every shot is on a tripod for a couple of reasons really. Because I don't want any shaky pictures, and I want my hands free to either the cable control to trip the switch, or I use filters a lot, graduated filters, neutral density filters, and I want my hands free because you don't want to drop the filters because they ain't cheap, especially if you use Lee ones. There's 4 things that a camera's got to do to take a picture. The first one it has to think about is ISO. Aperture is another, shutter speed is another, and focus is another. So ISO, any camera, I leave it on 100, ISO 100. My aperture, I pretty much shoot all my shots at f/16. There's times where it's going to change. Obviously, if I'm shooting a flower and I want it to jump out the scene, then I'll shoot at an aperture of like 1.8, 2.8, something like that. Shutter speed is the shutter that comes across in front of the sensor. The click click when you hear it. And then last of all is the focusing. There's no point in getting a perfectly exposed picture if it's not in focus. I always shoot in manual, not for any particular reason other than it's just easier. What I do is I pick up my camera, I put my ISO to 100, I put my aperture to f/16, and then all I've got to worry about is my shutter speed and my focusing. That's it. Camera on tripod. Now, here's my camera. Turn him on. Right, if you look on the back there, you can see that it's in manual mode going by the M. Then above that it says 4 seconds, and then beside that it says f/16, and then beside that again it says ISO 100. So I'm shooting in manual mode because of the M. f/16 is my aperture, ISO is 100. Now if I turn my wheel, the only thing that changes is my shutter speed, because that's all I want to change. Everything else is set. This is why you need to keep the booklet, because you need to know how to get it in manual mode, and you need to know where shutter speed is, you need to know where aperture is. I can say that if you're turning a dial and it's going 150, 100, 200, 400, 800, 1600, that means you're controlling the ISO. If you're moving a dial and you see a number on the back moving, it's going f5.6, f7.1, f16, that's the aperture. If you're moving another dial and you can see 1 stroke 100th, 1 stroke 200th, 1 stroke 30th, that's the shutter speed that you're controlling. But of course, put it into manual. So any camera I pick up, put it into manual. I put my ISO to 100 because I pretty much shoot at ISO 100 all the time. I put my aperture on f/16. All I've got to worry about now is focusing and shutter speed. Every time I line the camera up, I'll always line up my shot looking through the viewfinder. I don't know, it's just I feel like I'm in the shot more, and I just feel like I'm in the scene. I use live view to focus, camera on the tripod, turn my live view on, and I'll just manually focus on what I want to focus on in the picture. Simple as. Rule of thumb is, if you're shooting a landscape, focus a third of the way into the scene, and then shooting at f/16, most of the scene will be in acceptable focus. Obviously it will fall off the further it goes along, but if you're shooting, let's just say a beach, and there's some rocks in the foreground and you want them sharp, focus on the rocks. As long as you're shooting at f/16, a lot will be in focus. Live view, manual on the lens, the little gear stick on the back. You can move around and focus on exactly what you want. Turn your focus in. That's it. That's as simple as it is. That's our focus. Easy. Cool. The difference between these apertures of aperture f1.8, 2.2 goes all the way up to f22. Right, if this is your scene, this is your camera. Now let's just say we're focusing on this peanut or whatever nut it is. Right, we're focusing on that nut, yeah, that's our camera. Now if I'm shooting at 1.8, there's only going to be about this much in focus. A little bit in front, but a little bit more behind. Now if I change my F number to 5.6, there'd be a bit more in front, not much, but more in focus behind. Now if I put my focus point to f16, a bit more in front and a lot more behind is going to be in focus. People say, well, why don't you just put your aperture on f22, then everything will be in focus. That's cool, but then when you go up to real high or a high f number of f22, you get something called diffraction. Now when the light comes in the front of the lens, your aperture is really small, and diffraction is where the light comes through and it bounces around, and then your picture's not as sharp. As weird as that sounds, for me f16 works fine. I've zoomed in on my pictures in editing and they're lovely and sharp at f16. Camera's on the tripod, so I've got my hands free except for holding this thing. ISO 100, aperture f16. All we've got to worry about now is the focusing and the shutter speed. Let's have a look. Manual on the top. Manual focus. And on. f16, ISO 100. So all we've got to worry about now is the shutter speed and the focusing. So, live view on. And what I do is I'll go down here, third of the way into the scene. I'll zoom in a bit more, and then round to the front of the camera. On this particular lens, this is the focusing. That's the zoom. This is your focus. Now I'm zoomed in. I'm just turning out of focus, in focus, out of focus, in focus, out of focus, in focus, out of focus, in focus. Go back out. That's your histogram telling you obviously the bright to the right is the bright sky, darker to the left, which is the foreground because it's dark. As I add a longer shutter speed of 2 seconds, it gets brighter on the right. And quicker shutter speed, 1/6 of a second, it's darker on the left. So, we get it roughly there somewhere. And obviously there's a little stripe here, right at the right hand side. Remember, bright to the right, that there is the bright sky, because it's darker than the foreground. There's not a lot we can do about that, apart from use filters. So now, all we do, take a picture. Hope this helps. Like I say, I've done it just for me. If ever I fall out of a tree one day, dink me head and forget everything I've learned, I'm going to be gutted. And cool. Take it easy. See you about. Cheers.